Nobody expects to get a receipt for a luxury glamping yurt when they are hiding from the IRS in Costa Rica. But my daughter Emily gets one every Friday morning at exactly 8:05 a.m., itemizing a $295 Stargazer suite booking she never made. And I get a small, satisfying ping on my phone that the automated restitution payment just hit my account. This all began with a metal file box I found in my late husband's workshop the day of his funeral, and a handwritten note on the back of an old promissory note template that said, "She will try to sell the land, Marion. Use this. I have already done the hard part. My name is Marion and I am 52 years old. For 30 years I worked as a forensic bookkeeper for a mid-size credit union, the kind of woman who could walk into a courtroom with a single binder of spreadsheets and dismantle a $1 million embezzlement scheme down to the penny. I know how to read a general ledger like most people read a menu, and I have never met a balance sheet that could not be made to confess. That skill set, it turns out, is genetic. My late husband Tom was a master carpenter and a quiet, meticulous student of property law. He read deeds and land contracts for pleasure the way other men read fishing magazines. He knew how a meets and bounds description could be weaponized, and he had a deep, almost instinctive suspicion of anyone who used the phrase, "It's just family." He never quite trusted our daughter Emily, not after she married Marcus. Tom died of a sudden heart attack on a rainy Tuesday in March. I found him slumped over his workbench in the garage, a half-finished birdhouse still cradled in his hands, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil still hanging in the air. The funeral was a numb blur of casseroles and awkward condolences, but the vultures landed before the dirt settled. Emily and Marcus showed up the night before the service, not to mourn but to, as they put it, get the estate sorted. Emily swept through the house with a clipboard like she was cataloguing a liquidation sale, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors I had helped Tom sand, and finished the year we bought the place. Marcus made loud phone calls in the driveway about the condo and the life insurance policy, his voice carrying through the open windows with a casual cruelty that made my stomach tighten. The following afternoon, after the graveside service, they went into Tom's workshop and started throwing things into heavy black trash bags. I stood in the doorway, still in my black dress, too hollow to argue. Emily picked up a beat-up grey metal file box, the kind with a rusted clasp and a dented corner, and said, "Mom, this is just junk from the 90s. Old tax stuff. I'll toss it." I nodded vaguely, my mind still replaying the image of Tom's hands, still and cold, and she dropped it into a bag with a clang. But late that night, when the house was silent and my grief had turned from fog into a sharp ache, I pulled the box out of the trash bin and hid it in the back of the linen closet behind a stack of towels. I did not open it until 3 days later, when the last condolence card had been read, and I finally had the house to myself. Inside, beneath a thick layer of yellowed tax returns and outdated repair manuals, I found a manila envelope with my name on it in Tom's handwriting. Inside the envelope were 3 carbon copies of a blank promissory note with fillable fields, a blank deed of trust form, and a single white sheet of paper folded in thirds. On that paper, in Tom's careful carpenter's script, the letters formed with the same precision he used to cut dovetail joints, was a warning. "Marion, if you are reading this, I am gone and Emily is already circling. She will try to take everything. Do not give her cash, build her a house, but make her sign this paper. Secure it with a first lien on the property. The condo is yours, free and clear. Sell it and buy land in your name only. You can always foreclose if she breaks the terms. I love you. Save yourself." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that even family should come with a contract. Over the next several weeks, Emily and Marcus turned their attention to what they called my fragile state. They would show up unannounced with containers of lukewarm soup, settle into my living room, and begin gentle, insistent conversations about how I needed to simplify my life. Emily kept using words like protect and streamline, and Marcus would nod along with a concerned frown that never quite reached his eyes. They suggested I sell the condo. They offered to handle my finances, just to take the burden off my shoulders. I played along, letting my voice go soft and my gaze a little unfocused. I would say things like, "I just don't know what to do with all these papers," and watch them exchange a quick, greedy glance. I was not confused. I was inventorying their tells. Marcus touched his left ear every time he lied about money. Emily over-explained, piling unnecessary details onto simple answers until the truth suffocated beneath the weight of her performance. They believed I was a grief-stricken widow who could barely balance a checkbook. They had no idea I had spent decades testifying in federal court about fraudulent transfers, shell companies, and predatory lending schemes. So I let them push, and then one sunny afternoon in April I made my offer. I told them I wanted a fresh start for all of us. I would sell my paid-off condo, take the $90,000 in equity, and buy a piece of raw land out in the county. I would build them a custom tiny house and a separate guest cabin for myself, a little eco-retreat where we could all heal together. They nearly vibrated with excitement, but I added one condition, delivered in the same soft, foggy voice. They had to sign a secured promissory note for the full $90,000, with me as the lender, recorded as a first priority lien against the property, and they had to sign a written life estate agreement guaranteeing me the right to occupy the guest cabin for as long as I lived. Emily said, "Of course, Mom, whatever makes you feel safe," before I even finished the sentence. Marcus barely glanced at the acceleration clause, the one that said if they sold the property, took out any other loan without my consent, or failed to maintain the property taxes, the entire $90,000 balance became immediately due and payable. I had a real estate attorney named Gerald Finch handle every piece of paper. Gerald was 70 years old, sharp as a straight razor, and he had known Tom for over 40 years. They used to argue about zoning variances over cheap whiskey at the Elks Lodge. He understood exactly what we were building. He recorded the deed of trust with the county recorder's office before the ink was dry, and he triple-checked that the lien was in first position with no junior encumbrances allowed without my notarized signature. Then I sold the condo, bought a 5-acre parcel with a seasonal creek and a stand of old oaks, and supervised the construction of 2 small but beautiful structures. My guest cabin had a wide porch facing the sunrise and a separate electric meter. Their tiny house had bamboo floors, a composting toilet, and a decorative sign over the door that said "Blessed." I moved into the cabin, and for about 11 months things were quiet, but I was watching. Bookkeepers are built for patient observation. We know that patterns change before balances do, and that the first signs of trouble rarely show up on a spreadsheet. The first red flag was Marcus's new truck. He pulled into the driveway one afternoon in a King Cab diesel with temporary paper tags still flapping in the wind, and when I asked about it he said he had gotten a great lease deal through a friend, a lease on a $50,000 truck. He was unemployed at the time. A week later, Emily came home with 2 large boxes from a high-end outdoor outfitter, enough camping gear to launch a small expedition company, but they never went anywhere. Then the phone calls started. Marcus would pace the gravel driveway in the evenings, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid, agitated Spanish. I speak enough Spanish from community college classes to pick up certain words. I heard préstamo, which means loan. I heard cierre again and again, which means closing. I heard cuenta en el extranjero, offshore account. He would hang up and stare at his phone like it had burned him. One night around 11, I was reading in my cabin with the window cracked open when I heard Emily's voice cutting through their thin walls. "It is only 3 more months, Marcus. We just need her to sign the one thing and then we are gone." Her tone was not pleading. It was the impatient cadence of someone reviewing a checklist. They thought I was asleep. I was not asleep. I was making notes in a small spiral logbook I kept hidden under a loose floorboard beneath my bed, a hiding spot Tom had shown me years ago when he installed the floor. I recorded dates, times, snippets of conversation. The property taxes came due in December and they paid late, incurring a penalty. The electric bill was taped to the front door once, a shut-off notice with the word "Final" stamped in red. Meanwhile, I noticed the mailbox at the end of the drive had a new lock, a shiny little brass padlock that I had not been given a key for. I have a rule I learned from 30 years of fraud investigation. Never, ever ignore a changed lock you do not own the key to. Somebody is always hiding something behind a door they do not want you to open. I began to log every observable anomaly in a systematic way, the way I used to reconstruct a suspect's cash flow. Dates, amounts, behavioral changes. I noted that the property tax penalty was for a payment that had been only 4 days late, the kind of error that suggests there is simply no cash in the checking account. I noted that the shut-off notice was for a balance of $847, an amount that far exceeded normal usage for 2 people in a tiny house. I noted that the padlock on the mailbox was a Master 140, a model with a 4-pin tumbler that I could pick in under a minute if necessary. I began to keep a second logbook, this one a simple cash ledger with columns for date, description and debit. I estimated their monthly burn rate based on visible spending and the loan payments I would later uncover, and the numbers pointed to an accelerating financial desperation. They were burning through capital at a rate that made no sense unless there was a large hidden debt being serviced or a large expected windfall being relied upon. The The storm hit in late October of that second year. A violent thunderstorm rolled through the valley at 2 in the morning, and a lightning strike fried the main electrical panel in Emily and Marcus's house. The whole place went dark, all the lights and appliances dead, while my cabin hummed along happily on its separate meter. I woke to Marcus pounding on my door with a flashlight, looking genuinely panicked, his hair wild and his shirt misbuttoned. He led me over to their house and stood in the utility room, pointing at the breaker box like it was an alien artifact from another planet. He could not even locate the main disconnect, the large switch at the top that cuts all power. I, on the other hand, had been Tom's apprentice for 20 years. I knew how to read a circuit map, how to test a bus bar for continuity with a voltage tester, and how to replace a fried 60-amp double-pole breaker without shutting off the main by taping the box with a thick rubber mat and working one-handed with an insulated screwdriver. Tom called it the live swap shuffle, and I had watched him do it a dozen times. I fixed their panel in 40 minutes, using a spare breaker I had stored in my own supply box for exactly this kind of situation. When the lights flickered back on, the first thing I noticed was a set of deep scratch marks around the seal on the electric meter socket outside. Someone had been prying at the meter ring, probably trying to bypass the meter and draw unmetered power. That explained the shut-off notices. They were stealing electricity to hide massive usage, and I immediately thought of the old garden shed at the far edge of the property, the one with a new padlock that had appeared a few weeks earlier. I made a mental note. Then I went home and, using my phone, checked the county assessor's online permit portal. There were no permits on file for any new outbuilding, no electrical permits, no plumbing permits, nothing. Something was happening inside that shed, and whatever it was, they were hiding it from the county, from the power company, and from me. I decided to start with their filing cabinet. Tom always said a lock is just a puzzle that has not been solved yet. In his workshop, tucked into the back of a drawer filled with router bits, I had found a small leather roll of lockpicking tools, tension wrenches, a half-diamond pick, a short hook, and a homemade rake he had shaped from a windshield wiper insert. He taught me to pick locks on rainy weekends, starting with a cheap master padlock and working up to a Schlage deadbolt. He taught me to feel each pin with the tip of the pick, to listen for the tiny click as the shear line aligned, to apply just enough rotational torque with the tension wrench to bind the cylinder without oversetting the pins. At 2 in the morning, 2 days after the storm, I pulled on a pair of thin nitrile gloves, slipped into their unlocked house through the back door, and knelt in front of their filing cabinet. It was a cheap 2-drawer unit with a simple wafer lock, the kind you can buy at any office supply store. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied a feather-light rotational pressure, and worked the half-diamond pick into the top. I could feel 4 wafers, and they all felt stiff and grimy. The first 3 set with crisp little clicks. The 4th stuck. I eased off the tension slightly, raked it twice, and felt the entire plug rotate. The lock opened in under 45 seconds. Inside, in a hanging folder labeled Marion Darks, I found a completed but unsigned release of lien form, with my signature already forged at the bottom. I recognized my own name written in a hand that was not mine, the loops too tight, the slant wrong. The notary stamp was a grainy photocopy, and when I later checked the seal number against the state database, it did not match any active notary in the county. Behind the release was a fully executed purchase agreement from a development company called Sunvest Holdings, offering $410,000 for the entire 5 acres and all improvements, contingent on a clean title and the removal of my life estate. The closing date was set for 2 weeks from that night. Stapled to the back page was a wire transfer instruction sheet directing the net proceeds of $195,400 to a numbered account at Banco Nacional de Costa Rica. Behind that, in a separate folder labeled Loan, I found a promissory note and deed of trust for a hard money loan of $190,000 from a lender called Canyon Bridge Capital. The loan was secured by a second position deed of trust on the property, executed without my knowledge or consent, in direct violation of the due on encumbrance clause in my original first lien deed of trust. Marcus and Emily had borrowed $190,000 against land they did not own free and clear, using a fraudulent loan application that listed Emily as the sole owner. The loan had a 14% interest rate and a balloon payment due in 12 months. They had been bleeding cash to service it, and now they were trying to sell the whole property out from under me, forge my signature, and vanish to Costa Rica with the equity. I photographed every page with my phone, carefully replaced the documents in the exact order I had found them, and relocked the cabinet. Then I walked back to my cabin, made a pot of strong coffee, and sat at my kitchen table in the dark, studying the photos. The next morning I called Gerald Finch. I described every document in precise detail and sent him the photographs through an encrypted email service he and I had used years earlier for a sensitive client matter. He was silent for a long moment after viewing them. Then he made a low sound in his throat, not quite a laugh, more like a satisfied rumble. He told me something I had not known, something Tom had put in place without ever mentioning to anyone. When Tom learned I was buying the land and building the tiny house, he had quietly, almost secretly, funded and filed a declaration of homestead and a revocable living trust. The trust named me as sole trustee and sole beneficiary. It held title to the land, but it contained a very specific co-trustee provision. Any sale, transfer, or encumbrance of the property required the unanimous consent of a co-trustee, and that co-trustee was identified only by the holding of a physical key. The key was a custom-machined brass key to a safe deposit box that Tom had left in my name at the credit union where I used to work. I had not even known the box existed. Gerald drove me to the credit union that same afternoon, and the branch manager, a woman who had known me for 20 years, led me into the vault. I turned the brass key in the lock, the mechanism clicking with the heavy precision of Swiss engineering, and slid out a long metal drawer. Inside was a single document, a notarized amendment to the trust agreement specifying that the co-trustee's identity could only be proven by the presentation of the physical key itself, and that the co-trustee had to be present in person at any closing. It was a dead man's switch of the most elegant kind. Tom had anticipated that Emily would try to sell the land, and he had built a legal tripwire that no amount of forgery could bypass. Emily and Marcus could forge my signature, they could lie to the title company, they could trick a hard money lender into giving them a fraudulent second lien, but they could never, ever close the sale without me physically walking into that title office, key in hand, and signing in front of a notary. Gerald had already flagged the property's title with the county recorder because his office had caught an inquiry from Sunvest's title company. He had politely informed them that the chain of title was clouded by a trust instrument that could not be ignored. The sale was doomed before it started, but the conspirators did not know it yet. Gerald introduced me to a woman named Lena Okonkwo, a compliance officer with the Federal Housing Finance Agency, who was already building a case against Sunvest Holdings for a pattern of flipping land using fraudulent documents and straw buyers. Lena and I spoke by phone for an hour that afternoon. She asked me detailed questions about the forged release, the notary seal, and the wire instructions. She explained that she needed physical evidence linking the wire transfer form directly to Sunvest, because that would establish a conspiracy to commit wire fraud across state lines, which brought the FBI into the picture. She asked if I would be willing to assist as a confidential informant. I agreed without hesitation. She sent a courier to my cabin with a tiny recording device disguised as a silver lapel pin, a device no larger than a thumbnail, but capable of capturing 40 hours of audio with noise filtering that could isolate a single voice in a crowded room. I started wearing it pinned to my blouse every day. Lena also gave me a small USB drive loaded with a passive data extraction tool. If I could plug it into any computer Emily or Marcus used, it would silently copy all recently modified financial documents and email attachments onto an encrypted partition. I tucked the USB drive into the lining of my handbag. The test came 3 days before the scheduled closing. I needed to know if there was any sliver of humanity left in my daughter, any residual filament of the child I had raised. So I staged a collapse. I had practiced this for a week, watching instructional videos on how to faint safely without injuring myself. You lock your knees, let your vision go soft, and then you just unstring your muscles and drop. One warm afternoon, when I knew both Emily and Marcus were home and within earshot, I walked into their kitchen carrying a basket of tomatoes from my garden. I made sure my breathing was shallow and my skin looked flushed from the heat. Then I grabbed my chest with both hands, let out a choked gasp, and went down hard on the linoleum floor, my head hitting with a dull thud that I had practiced on a yoga mat in my cabin. I lay completely still, eyes closed, regulating my breath to a slow, barely perceptible rhythm. I could hear every sound in the room with terrible clarity. Emily's voice came first, thin and startled. "What happened? Did she fall? Is she breathing?" Then Marcus, closer, his footsteps heavy. "I don't know, just get the folder. Did she sign the release yet?" Footsteps moved past me, not toward me, toward the counter where I knew the forged release papers were lying. Emily's voice again, tight with impatience. "No, it's still blank. We need her thumbprint anyway. Can we just press her thumb to the ink pad while she's out?" Marcus answered, his tone utterly flat and lacking any urgency about my condition. Wait 15 minutes, if she doesn't come around we call 911, but if we do it while she's unconscious the notary might question it later. Just wait. I lay on that cold floor, the linoleum smelling faintly of bleach, and I waited. Not one of them touched me, not one of them felt for a pulse, not one of them dialed emergency services. They argued for another 4 minutes about whether a coerced thumbprint would hold up in probate court if I died. Emily said, if she dies right here the trust might automatically dissolve and we can just file a death certificate with the title company. Marcus replied, don't be stupid. A death certificate takes weeks, we need the money now. That was the moment the last remaining bond of motherhood inside me dissolved. It did not break, it simply evaporated, replaced by something cold and efficient, something that looked a lot like justice. The closing was set for Tuesday afternoon at a title company in the next town over. Emily told me we were all going together to refinance the house, and that I just needed to sign a couple of routine documents to clear up an old lien. I said I would attend, but I insisted on driving my own car. I wore a simple navy blouse with the silver lapel pin centered above my heart, and I carried a large leather handbag that contained the manila envelope of evidence Gerald and Lena had helped me organize, along with the safe deposit box key on a chain around my neck, tucked beneath my collar. When we arrived, the title agent, a young woman named Cheryl with a nervous smile, and a stack of documents 2 inches thick, led us into a small conference room with a long laminate table. Emily positioned herself beside me on my right, leaning close enough that I could smell her perfume, a scent I had bought her for her 21st birthday. Marcus stood by the door, ostensibly giving us space, but his body was blocking the exit. I sat down calmly, folded my hands on the table, and asked Cheryl to hand me the settlement statement first. She pushed a multi-page HUD-1 form across the table. I picked it up and began reading it line by line, my lips moving silently. The room went quiet. Emily shifted in her chair. Mom, you don't need to read all of that, it's just formalities. We need to sign before the bank closes. I did not look up. I kept reading. Line 101 showed the gross sale price, $410,000. Line 503 showed a payoff to Canyon Bridge Capital in the amount of $193,412, including accrued interest and penalties. Line 603 showed the net cash to seller, $195,400, wired to an account at Banco Nacional de Costa Rica. I set the page down with deliberate care and looked at Cheryl. This payoff amount, I said, pointing to line 503, is for a second position lien that was obtained without the consent of the first lien holder, which is a direct violation of the deed of trust recorded on this property. That makes this entire settlement statement invalid. Cheryl's nervous smile vanished. Emily's face went the color of old milk. Marcus took a step toward the table, and I heard the recording device in my lapel capture the sound of his shoes on the tile. I turned to my daughter. I am a forensic bookkeeper, Emily. I have never signed a document I have not fully audited, and I have already fully audited every document in this transaction. The release of lien on page 7 contains a forged signature that is not mine. The notary stamp is a photocopy of a revoked seal. And the wire instructions on the final page direct funds to an offshore account in Costa Rica, which constitutes wire fraud under 18 U.S. Code Section 1343. I pulled the manila envelope from my handbag and removed the photographs one by one, laying them on the table like a winning poker hand. I am exercising my right under Section 3 of the original promissory note to accelerate the full $90,000 balance immediately due to breach of contract, fraud, and violation of the due on encumbrance clause. I am also filing a criminal complaint for forgery, mortgage fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The outer door of the conference room opened, and Lena Okonkwo walked in, her federal badge clipped to her belt, flanked by 2 county sheriff's deputies and a special agent from the FBI's white-collar crime division. My cell phone, which I had set face up on the table, chimed with a text from Gerald. It read simply, "The trust held, they can't close, the key is safe." Emily screamed something unintelligible about entrapment and lawyers. Marcus lunged for the side door, but a deputy was already there with a hand on his shoulder, and the agent began reciting the Miranda warning in a calm, practiced tone. I sat very still, watching my daughter's face contort through shock, rage, and then a flat, calculating coldness I had never seen there before. The recording device caught everything she had said in the car on the way over, including a line from Marcus that would later be played in open court. If she balks at the table, we just take her back to the cabin and try again tomorrow. She's old. She'll break. The sale was voided by court order within 72 hours. Gerald filed an emergency motion to quiet title based on the forged release and the undisclosed second lien, attaching the trust document and the photographic evidence of fraud. The judge granted it after a 15-minute hearing, during which Emily attempted to argue that I had given her the land, but the recorded deed of trust and the trust instrument spoke for themselves. Because the promissory note contained a valid acceleration clause and a power of sale provision, I initiated a non-judicial foreclosure on the $90,000 debt. The property was scheduled for auction on the county courthouse, steps 30 days later. Gerald walked me through the foreclosure process line by line. We had to publish a notice of default in a local newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks, post a notice on the property, and mail certified copies to every interested party. Canyon Bridge Capital tried to intervene with a motion to stay, arguing that their second lien should survive the foreclosure, but their own loan documents contained a clause stating they had relied on the borrower's false representation of clean title, and that clause shifted the liability squarely onto Emily and Marcus. The judge denied their motion and noted on the record that the hard money lender had failed to perform even basic due diligence, such as verifying the first lien position with the county recorder, which would have revealed my deed of trust in minutes. On the day of the auction, I stood on the courthouse steps with Gerald, a cashier's check in my handbag drawn on a secured line of credit backed by the trust. I was the only bidder. I purchased the 5 acres and all improvements for exactly $90,000, the amount of my outstanding debt. The foreclosure process, by operation of law, wiped out the hard money lender's second position lien because it had been executed in violation of the first deed of trust's due on encumbrance clause, and because the lender could not produce a valid consent from me. I owned the land free and clear, with no mortgage, no note, and my life estate converted automatically into full fee simple ownership. Emily and Marcus accepted a plea deal 8 months later. They pled guilty to 2 counts of felony forgery and 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud. The federal wire fraud charges were dropped in exchange for their cooperation against SunVest Holdings, which was eventually indicted on 14 counts of racketeering and money laundering. Emily and Marcus were sentenced to 18 months in state prison, with 5 years of supervised probation, and a restitution order requiring them to repay the full $90,000 plus $32,000 in legal fees and investigative costs, with statutory interest accruing at 9% per annum. The plea deal included a permanent injunction against them ever contacting me again. The day after their release, they fled the country using money they had stashed in a secondary offshore account that the plea deal had not fully seized. They surfaced in Costa Rica a week later, posting smug photos on a social media account I had been quietly monitoring through a former colleague in the cyber fraud unit. But they overlooked one detail. The restitution order gave me the right to garnish any United States domiciled bank account held in their names or any account into which they deposited U.S.-sourced funds, and my forensic bookkeeper network is extensive and patient. Every few months, a credit union reports a new checking account, an old savings bond matures, a forgotten tax refund check gets deposited. I file a writ of garnishment, and a small chunk of money transfers back to me. It is never the full amount. It will take decades to collect the entire judgment. That suits me perfectly. While they adapted to the tropical humidity and the slow grind of their paranoia, I cleared the land of the tiny house they had lived in. I hired a local crew, and we demolished it down to the subfloor, saving every usable board and beam. The shed with the padlock contained nothing but an illegal Bitcoin mining rig, a dozen graphics cards running hot in a poorly ventilated box, which explained the meter tampering and the astronomical electric bill. I had the rig dismantled and scrapped, the scrap metal payment covering the cost of the new breaker I had installed months earlier. Then I built something beautiful. I used Tom's old architectural sketches, the ones he had doodled on napkins and scraps of plywood, and I turned the 5 acres into a luxury glamping retreat called Second Chance Acres. There are 4 yurts now, each with a private cedar hot tub and a stargazing dome in the roof. There are 2 tiny cabins with full kitchens, and my own small house sits at the edge of the property surrounded by a field of wildflowers I planted myself. The business has been profitable beyond my hopes, attracting couples and small families who want a quiet, eco-friendly escape. But my favorite feature is a piece of custom software I paid a developer in Portland to write. My online booking system is tied to a database I compiled of every known email address Emily ever used, the ones she listed on that fraudulent loan application, the burner accounts she used to communicate with Sunvest, the old personal email she had as a teenager. Every time a new guest makes a reservation, the system generates an invoice and automatically sends a courtesy receipt directly to every single one of those addresses. It is nothing legally actionable. It is simply a notification, an itemized bill, a thank you note from the management, and a small thumbnail photo of the very yurt that now sits on the exact footprint where her tiny house used to stand. I like to imagine her staring at that email, the tropical sun beating through a cheap rental window, knowing that every $1 Second Chance Acres earns is $1 that, in some small way, she is still paying back. And every Friday morning at 8:05 a.m., when my phone pings with a new booking, and I know that a fresh receipt is winging its way through the digital void, I pour myself a cup of strong black coffee, look up at the framed metal file box on my bookshelf, and whisper, "Thanks, Tom, the contract is still working." Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If you believe that family should come with a contract and a lien, hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. I will see you in the next one.